This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. In former President Trump's criminal trial today, the prosecution called a series of witnesses to testify about the business records. But the testimony of the day was the cross-examination of Stormy Daniels. Daniels received $130,000 in exchange for her silence about an alleged affair with Trump. Here's our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards.
On Thursday, the tables were turned on a witness who appears to want revenge against former President Trump. Stormy Daniels returned to the stand Thursday for more cross-examination from the defense. She testified 2 days ago that she hated Trump and said that she didn't care so much about the $130,000 payment. She just wanted to get the story out about the alleged affair. Today, the defense pushed hard on Daniels over the deals they say she made with her story, including a book deal and documentary. Daniels said she was just telling her life story, but the defense reminded her that she's made hundreds of thousands of dollars on those deals. Daniels had previously testified that she stopped talking to Trump after she couldn't get on The Apprentice. In several of her Twitter posts shown to the jury, Daniels was attacking Trump, but she said she was defending herself. At one point, the defense showed the jury posts of Daniels bragging about how she got Trump indicted and selling merchandise that says Stormy, Saint of Indictments. The defense highlighted how Daniels' testimony about the affair is different from what she said in 2011 and 2018 interviews. She said she couldn't remember all of the details. When the defense asked her if she had made the story up, she denied it. In other testimony today, the prosecution called a series of witnesses, including a bookkeeper from the Trump Organization, a publisher, and a former White House assistant. Their testimonies helped the prosecution to show the jury that Trump did sign checks that were ultimately sent to Michael Cohen as reimbursement. But it isn't clear still how Trump falsified business records. Arlene Richards reporting from the criminal courthouse in Manhattan.
As he entered the courtroom today, Trump said his legal team filed an appeal against the gag order. He called the order unconstitutional and said it prevents him from talking about anything meaningful. Judge Juan Merchan later denied the appeal. Trump's attorneys then filed a request for a mistrial, and the judge denied that request as well. It was the second time the judge denied a motion for a mistrial. Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida was in the courtroom today to show support for Trump. Speaking to reporters, he called the trial political persecution of the former president. Former President Trump's youngest son, Barron Trump, has been chosen as an at-large delegate for Florida at the Republican National Convention. 18-year-old Barron joins several other family members, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Tiffany Trump, who were also selected. Trump's longtime friend and luxury real estate developer Steve Witkoff, along with Trump advisor and associate Sergio Gore, are also listed as delegates. The Republican National Committee will hold its convention in Milwaukee in July. Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, has said he will likely announce his running mate around that time. The White House says Israel will get everything it needs to defend itself against Hamas. That's despite President Biden pausing an arms shipment to Israel, citing risks to civilians. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
The White House is insisting that the U.S. is not walking away from Israel, even though President Biden told CNN that he would stop sending Israel offensive weapons if it proceeds with a ground offensive in Rafah. Here's National Security spokesperson John Kirby briefing us on Thursday morning.
He's going to continue to provide Israel with the capabilities that it needs, all of them. But he does not want certain categories of American weapons used in a particular type of operation in a particular place.
What Biden wants instead, the White House says, is alternatives that will still achieve Israel's goals but avoid further civilian casualties. Kirby adds that a ground operation in Rafah, where 1 million Palestinians are sheltering, could benefit Hamas in negotiations.
Rafah ground operation would actually strengthen Hamas's hands at the negotiating table, not Israel's. It just gives him more ammunition for his twisted narrative here.
Despite Biden's warning, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday sounding defiant, saying Israel won the war of independence even without armed support. And now,
if we have to stand alone, we will stand alone. I have already said that if we have to, we will fight with our nails.
And earlier, Israel's national security minister tweeted, Hamas loves Biden. That's as former President Trump is also accusing Biden of, quote, taking the side of these terrorists.
He's totally abandoned Israel.
But the White House says these arguments are just not true, citing Biden's actions in sending U.S. pilots to defend Israel from drone attacks and also ordering our own military to help Israel through its war planning. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Senate and House Republicans showed a united front in denouncing President Biden's warning that the U.S. will withhold weapons shipments to Israel if it invades Rafah. The Senate unveiled a resolution to condemn the move, while in the House, Congressman Corey Mills says he's preparing articles of impeachment against the president. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
On Thursday, Senate Republicans unveiled a resolution condemning President Biden's decision to withhold foreign military aid to Israel. Senator Lindsey Graham urged the president to reconsider his policies.
Withholding weapons makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to get American hostages back and Israeli hostages back because you're incentivizing bad behavior.
House Republicans have also been critical of the president's decision. Congressman Mike Lawler, the Republican from New York, accused the president of playing electoral politics with U.S. foreign policy.
So what the president is doing here is capitulating because of electoral politics, because he's concerned about the vote in Michigan and Minnesota. And that is taking precedent over eliminating a terroristic threat. And to me, that's unconscionable. Congress passed aid to Israel just a few weeks ago. The president has a responsibility to move that aid expeditiously.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who had previously called for new elections in Israel, maintained his support for the president and his policies.
I believe that Israel and America have an ironclad relationship, and I have faith in what the Biden administration is doing.
While other Democrats, like Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who believe that the president is mistaken in his foreign policy towards Israel.
But I don't agree with that. I don't believe there should be any conditions with Israel. When you are in a war with another side that has no conditions or any kinds of morality or any kinds of standards, I really think we need to be absolutely ready to stand with Israel and provide whatever they need.
According to Senator Ted Cruz, Republicans are considering their options in curtailing the prerogative of the president of withholding foreign aid without consulting Congress. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
As Israel continues to push forward with its ground offensive in Rafah and the Gaza Strip, some Palestinians are still trying to flee to safety, and others have complained of not having enough food. But help is apparently on the way as the first shipment of aid to the U.S.-built pier near Gaza has departed. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war.
Families in the Gaza Strip are once again on the move as Israel Defense Forces appear determined to push forward with ground operations in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip.
We keep moving from one place to another. This child was born during the war. What is his fault? He was born in Rafah. There's no clothes. What is the fault of these children? What can we say?
And many residents are also concerned about not having enough food to eat as Israel Defense Forces have shut down the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, through which humanitarian aid is normally delivered. But now that the U.S.-built floating pier off the Gaza coast is complete, Cyprus's foreign minister said the first shipment of aid to the pier has departed. Meanwhile, in Israel, protesters tried to block aid from getting into the Gaza Strip.
These trucks are taking food to Hamas. Hamas are murderers, rapists, terrible, terrible people. We think that our government has been forced by the Americans to give them this food. We don't like it. We're doing our best to stop them.
And family members of hostages continue to bear the pain of having their loved ones held captive by Hamas.
For us, every minute there's a little bit hope. Sometimes it makes it even harder because you allow yourself to hope, and then you fall again because again it fails. So it's like a roller coaster. It's really, really emotional and ups and downs.
There are over 130 hostages still being held in the Gaza Strip. A Hamas official said that if Israel continues with ground operations in Rafah, then there will be no ceasefire deal, while Israel says they are committed to achieving their war objectives, including bringing all of the hostages home. And on the ground in eastern Rafah, the IDF reported that 3 Israeli troops were injured near a booby-trapped tunnel entrance that exploded. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The Biden administration is expected to propose new asylum rules for immigrants this week. This as immigration remains a top concern for voters ahead of this year's presidential election.
Multiple outlets are reporting on President Biden's plans to propose asylum changes. They cite people familiar with the matter. The idea is to change the point at which illegal immigrants can be found ineligible for asylum. Right now, eligibility is determined during the interview stage, months after entry into the U.S. The reported plan is to determine eligibility during the initial screening stage, hours or days after entry. Biden is reportedly scheduled to make his proposal public this week. This comes after a group of House Democrats on Tuesday sent a letter to Biden saying they're urging the president to use every tool at his disposal, including executive action, to ensure order at the southern border. But critics of the reported plan say it wouldn't change much because people would just be admitted to the U.S. earlier. The Biden administration previously talked about stronger changes to current immigration laws. There are no plans for those to be announced at the moment. Meanwhile, in Colorado, a group of illegal immigrants at an encampment in Denver are refusing to move into an indoor shelter. Instead, they're now setting demands for city leaders. For example, they want the city to guarantee that there won't be a sheriff stationed at the shelter 24/7, arguing the illegal immigrants are not criminals. They also want the city to provide free immigration lawyers and other legal services, including free transportation to court dates, among other demands. Denver is already battling a $180 million budget gap, partly due to illegal immigration. Earlier this year, the city's mayor announced he'll cut public services to help pay for the immigration crisis. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Over 7 million people have entered the United States either illegally or through the amnesty system since President Biden came into office. A new investigative documentary by the Epoch Times uncovers how the United Nations and the U.S. government work hand in hand to facilitate mass immigration. The documentary, called Weapons of Mass Migration, concludes that mass migration is being weaponized to destroy America. The director and host of the documentary, Joshua Phillip, joins us now to discuss. Josh is also a senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, real pleasure, Tiffany.
Now, the title of your documentary, Mass Migration, expand on that for us. What did you uncover in your research that you ended up with this title of it being weaponized?
So the idea of weaponization means that you're using something to achieve a type of political goal that undermines one country's interests over another. And so that's what we found, basically. We found that this is part of a United Nations agreement that the United States is part of called the Global Compact for Migration. And that has set up this entire system of facilitating, through registering people trying to migrate to the United States in these camps all throughout Latin America, moving them by bus all through Latin America up to the U.S.-Mexico border. And then when they arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border, handing themselves in to Customs Border Protection, where they're then processed and then literally just dropped off on buses in different parts of the country, given free airplane tickets. And so I wanted to find out why they're doing this. And this gets into, of course, the weaponization part. On the US government side, I think it's more voting interest. This is an Obama-era program, and his own advisor on migration was talking about it based on voting. But when you get to the UN and, of course, nefarious interests, US enemies like China, the Chinese Communist Party, for example, the UN's talking about it on global equity, and the CCP and other countries are talking about these things based on what they call creating the multipolar world order, which requires the tearing down of the United States to build down this global system of governance they're trying to make.
Now, you mentioned the United Nations and its role in all of this. How does that work?
So that was one of my big questions, because several years ago, I had actually set out to investigate, what's really behind the border crisis. I originally thought I was going to find, maybe the cartels running it, and maybe U.S. government programs were, allowing this to happen. I found that actually, while the cartels do control some of the shipping, some of the choke points for human trafficking, mainly just at the border, there are actually some parts where they don't even have a presence. And that raised some other issues, because I started being told, actually, there's a program between the United States and the United Nations whereby our own tax dollars are funding this. I dug into previously the International Organization for Migration and the State Department programs facilitating the operations with them. But in this, I wanted to find out the deeper programs. And what I found was that there is an agreement signed that the United States is part of, as are many countries in Latin America, Africa, and Europe. And it's called the Global Compact for Migration. And the Global Compact for Migration is what has established all the different systems in place that facilitate mass illegal immigration, including, for example, the migrant camps, including the busing system, including the systems whereby different countries will move the migrants for the United States, even though they don't let them travel within their own countries, like in Panama, for example, and also the systems that facilitate it within our own country and allow taxpayer money to go towards it.
And what was your biggest takeaway while researching this that viewers need to know?
So I think as a country, we've been having a false debate around mass migration. And I think you see this, right? Whether people are on the right or the left, the way we normally debate it is on the migrants themselves. A lot of conservatives say, oh, they're invaders, and they talk about them on very negative grounds. A lot of people who are Democrats say, oh, you're being racist, and it's argued purely on the individuals. But I think what we should be debating is what is actually creating this crisis, what is actually incentivizing it, and what is actually facilitating it. Because now we know that we can even look at the United Nations budget, there are programs funded by American taxpayers paying for this. There are over 200, like roughly 270 NGOs operating this. And we're not talking about that. We're not discussing that part of it. And so I think maybe rather than discuss the individuals, we should be debating, do we want our tax money being used for these programs? And I think that's more of a constructive debate rather than just around, the individuals themselves.
Well, Joshua Phillip, host and director of the documentary Weapons of Mass Migration, and of course, senior investigative reporter at the Epoch Times. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Weapons of Mass Migration is set to premiere tonight on Epoch TV exclusively at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. To learn more about the documentary, you can also visit the website massmigrationfilm.com. In a move likely to appease the Chinese regime, Serbian authorities arrested several Falun Gong practitioners ahead of a visit by Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. NTD's Daniel Monahan spoke with one of the detainees who was released once Xi left the country.
The move by Serbian authorities occurred just days after Russian authorities raided 5 homes and arrested 4 Falun Gong practitioners, also ahead of a planned meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Xi. The regime has sought to export its persecution of Falun Gong beyond its border since 1999. Falun Gong is a spiritual discipline that consists of meditative exercises and moral principles. Business owner Dejan Markovic was one of those detained.
There were 6 practitioners and 2 family members who don't practice, including my own brother. And at some point, plainclothes police just came to our doors and asked us to go with them. You don't even get a pillow there. and of course, you don't get a toothbrush, and you get very little food, and you don't have a lavatory in the rooms.
Markovich says those arrested included an elderly woman nearing 80 years old, another woman almost 70 who had previously battled cancer, and a third woman around 60 years old.
So I wonder, are we that dangerous to Xi Jinping? He came here with 400 policemen on his side, and I'm sure that at least 3,000 policemen were engaged here to protect him, and still they're afraid of 8 people, among them one lady close to 80.
An arrest warrant issued for Markovich stated that he was suspected of posing a serious threat to persons under international protection. After Xi left the country, he and the other detainees were handed a document saying the threat doesn't exist anymore. The business owner says this isn't the first time the Serbian government has followed the will of the CCP. In 2019, he says they tried to hold a premiere of a documentary called Blacklisted about the illegal arrest of Falun Gong practitioners. The film was banned from the first 3 venues they found, but the authorities couldn't ban it from the 4th as it was owned by an Austrian company.
And during that event, I know that one of the venue directors said that she was contacted by a secretary from Ministry of External Affairs, and this secretary said that Chinese ambassador told him that she will leave the country if the film is premiered.
Serbia, a member of China's Belt and Road Initiative, relies heavily on billions of dollars in investment from China. Markovich says this cooperation comes with a heavy price.
It's not that they only want to build bridges and roads, they also introduce their totalitarian regime and control over people and things like that.
Markovich says practicing Falun Gong has dramatically improved his life.
I was not ill for one day for 19 years. I have a lot of energy. I do my job much better than before. I have family relationships much better than before.
NTD reached out to the Serbian authorities. We are still waiting to hear back from them. Those detained haven't been charged with any crimes. Markovich says that the practitioners plan to sue the government over the detention. Falun Gong practitioners in Serbia have previously brought forth 2 suits against the government, one over arrests in 2014, which they won in the country's highest court. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Falun Gong practitioners in New York are holding a parade tomorrow to celebrate the upcoming World Falun Dafa Day. Here's a preview.
A faith rich in beauty and tradition, uplifting the mind and body, persevering through decades of persecution. Watch our special coverage of the 2024 World Falun Dafa Day Parade live from New York City, starting 11 a.m. Eastern Time, here on NTD.
Joining me now to discuss Trump's hush money case is Jonathan Houlihan, General Counsel and Director of Legal Operations at Citizens Defending Freedom. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, what are your biggest takeaways from today's cross-examination of Stormy Daniels?
Well, I think it's just further evidence that this entire trial by DA Bragg is a dumpster fire. The judge seems surprised that he lit the dumpster on fire and then that it's on fire. They allowed all these salacious details meant to embarrass and prejudice President Trump coming to the trial. And that's why we have rules in place, most specifically the Sixth Amendment, to allow a fair and impartial trial. A lot of those details that came out really were meant to embarrass him and make him look like a bad guy. And now the judge in this case is kind of surprised that he's getting these requests for mistrials. In a lot of cases, they objected, they had a standing objection to Stormy Daniels even coming in as a witness because there was no reason to do so. Bragg, he indicted Trump on without clearly defining a charge. He resurrected 2 misdemeanor business records, misdemeanors for an undefined felony. So he really allowed the prosecutors in this case to prejudice President Trump with this testimony, even though they objected on the record, a standing objection and a few other objections. I think it would have been better to have lodged multiple more objections and then strike her testimony from the record. That would have created an appellate record that could have been a basis for a mistrial or to overturn any conviction that comes in place.
Expanding on your point, prosecutor Joshua Steinglass told Judge Merchan, quote, those messy details, that is motive, and that some very salacious details were purposely omitted from Stormy Daniels' account because they didn't want to embarrass Trump. Considering that the prosecution needs to prove in this case, or what the prosecution needs to prove, in your view, was it even necessary to call Daniels as a witness and have her describe all the details of the alleged affair?
Absolutely not. I mean, he allowed the prosecutors to get in this immaterial evidence throughout. I mean, the fact that there was an NDA in place, the so-called catch and kill story, that's normal business for publications like the National Enquirer. So she should have never even been allowed to testify, to get in all these salacious details to prejudice President Trump. It's really unfortunate that they've gone this direction and to make him look like a bad guy. And really, it kind of erodes the trust and confidence the American people have in the entire legal system.
On that note of prejudice, Judge Merchan today denied the defense's renewed motion for a mistrial. The defense had asked on the grounds that the testimony might have prejudiced the jury against Trump as in prejudicial evidence. Help us understand, what does that mean?
Well, it goes back to the Sixth Amendment, right, in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, that a criminal defendant is entitled to a fair and impartial trial. So when he's allowed the prosecutor to enter in these salacious details that are immaterial, just the whole relationship in general, whatever relationship was in place, allowing these details to make him look like a bad guy, that we have rules in place to avoid that, to let the jury decide on the facts, on the indictment, on the criminal charge, and not go into this theory that you should find him guilty because we don't like him for some reason. And allowing that, like I said, has been a dumpster fire. And now the court is almost surprised. Oh, wow, what have I done? Yes, you've allowed the defendant to be prejudiced with all these salacious details that never should have been put in the record in the first place.
And how do you see this case playing out as November approaches, given that the other trials are now up in the air? The classified documents case is postponed indefinitely. The D.C. election case is held up while the Supreme Court decides on presidential immunity, and the Georgia elections case is delayed over D.A. Fani Willis. Where do you see this case going?
Well, I think all Americans believe in the idea of fairness, fundamental fairness, the right to a fair trial, these core liberties that we have as Americans. And I think Americans don't like what they see. They don't like a former president of the United States being put on these public trials right before an election. And I think it could backfire. I mean, we are a nation of laws, not of men. And we have to live by that credence. We have to live by our Constitution. And we have to live by the rule of law. We're not a banana republic. We don't prosecute people because we don't like their politics or their position. We prosecute people because they've violated a crime or a statute. And it's just unfortunate that this could result in distrust of the legal system at large, more so than in the past. Further questioning credibility of courts, prosecutors, and really damaging the rule of law. And we don't need that in this country. We need people to have faith and confidence in the system, in the rule of law. They're going to get a fair shake. They're going to get a fair trial. Otherwise, there's no incentive to follow the rules and be a good citizen.
Jonathan Houlihan, General Counsel and Director of Legal Operations at Citizens Defending Freedom. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
A federal appeals court today refused to dismiss criminal gun charges against Hunter Biden. The move paves the way for a trial on June 3rd, which would be the first for the child of a sitting president. Hunter Biden had asked the Third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to dismiss the charges. He hoped the court would overturn prior decisions from the trial judge that the case should proceed. Instead, the appellate panel rejected the appeal. Prosecutors say the younger Biden bought and possessed a revolver in 2018. They claim that violated federal law because he was using drugs at the time. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to all 3 felony counts. Authorization for the Federal Aviation Administration expires at midnight tomorrow. Senators are racing against the clock to pass a week-long extension. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
Senators consider the FAA reauthorization bill on Thursday. It aims to bolster consumer protection and air traffic safety standards.
The $105 billion bill funds the Federal Aviation Administration and sets its guidelines for the next 5 years. Funding for the FAA is set to expire tomorrow night. If it expires, this won't shut down air traffic, but there will be no policy direction in the aviation industry. A series of disputes on what would be in the bill has delayed its progress in the Senate.
Mostly people are for reauthorization. They just want to put something on top of it to get something out of it.
Well, you know, we all saw what happened during the pandemic when that industry was almost in collapse. We had to lean in and protect that, and it's another situation. So, but it's going to be a compromise, I suspect, and that's what only happens around here, as probably as it should.
Among many provisions, the bill includes funding to hire more air traffic controllers. It would also ensure automatic cash refunds to airline passengers whose flights are canceled and not rebooked. The bill would also prohibit airlines from charging fees for families to sit together and require airlines to accept vouchers and credits for at least 5 years. On Wednesday, the House passed a week-long extension to approve the bill. It's unclear whether the Senate will meet its deadline to pass the same extension by tomorrow night.
Now, all of this comes after the FAA has experienced multiple near-miss collisions where there were miscommunications between air traffic control. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And we have some breaking news. The Senate just passed the Federal Aviation Administration bill as is, with no further changes. Another troubling incident for Boeing. One of its 737 planes today skidded off a runway while attempting to take off from an airport in Dakar, the capital of Senegal. 10 people were injured, including 4 in serious condition. Footage shows passengers going down the emergency slides as flames engulfed one side of the aircraft. Officials said the flight was heading to the neighboring country of Mali late Wednesday night. There were reportedly 85 people on board, including 2 pilots and 4 cabin crew. All flights have been suspended around Dakar following the incident. And in Istanbul, Turkey, a Boeing cargo plane was forced to touch down without its front tires. Luckily, it was able to stay on the runway and avoided casualties. Coming up, a new iPad ad is stirring up mixed reviews for showing what some say depicts Apple destroying symbols of human creativity. And in LPGA news, #1 ranked Nelly Korda goes for her record-breaking 6th straight win. Dave Martin joins us to discuss her first-round play when we return.